Long before Rome ruled the world, power already had a memory. Empires rise and fall, but families remember. This isn't a story written in a single place or preserved in a single archive. It survives in fragments, in symbols, and in the names that refuse to disappear from history. There are those who believe that Rome was never merely a city nor an empire, but a vessel. One that carried authority forward long after its banners had fallen. In this telling, Rome did not create power. It inherited it. And when Rome collapsed, what truly mattered didn't fall with it. To understand that belief, we've got to begin before the fall of the empire. And we'll begin with the families that are said to have stood behind the empire. In the ancient world, power didn't belong to nations, it belonged to blood. Roman society wasn't built on democracy as we understand it today. It was built on lineage, on generations. The great Roman families claimed descent not just from men, but from gods, heroes, mythic founders. To rule Rome wasn't simply to hold an office. It was to belong to a line that had always ruled. Now, these families intermarried, consolidated land, and they passed authority through generations. Names mattered, symbols mattered, memory mattered most of all. And according to later traditions, some of these bloodlines did not end with the empire. They retreated, transformed, and they waited. Roman history remembers emperors, but emperors rarely rule alone. Behind them stood entrenched families, senatorial houses whose wealth and lands and alliances outlived any single ruler. And these families, they governed provinces, controlled trade routes, and staffed the administrative machinery of the empire. In later centuries, medieval chroniclers and genealogists would claim that certain noble houses descended from these Roman elites. Though this didn't always occur through clean bloodlines, but through inheritance of lands, titles, and authority. Now, among the names that would surface in the later traditions were families said to have descended from the Roman patricians, guardians of memory rather than conquerors. Now, one such bloodline, according to these accounts, would one day be known as the Orsini. And at this stage in history, the name doesn't even exist yet, but the idea, it does. Ancient power was rarely recorded plainly. They encoded it in myth. Animals become emblems, stories become genealogies. In later traditions, the bear emerges as a symbol of endurance, the strength that survives winter, presence that doesn't seek attention. Chroniclers would later associate this symbolism with families believed to have survived the fall of Rome intact. These stories were not meant to be proven, they were meant to be remembered. In this version of history, bloodlines aren't measured by documents, but by continuity. By who remains when the world changes. Now, by the 4th century, the Roman Empire was already under strain. Borders stretched thin, armies divided, authority was fracturing. Emperors rose and fell at an alarming rate and an accelerating speed. To those who believed that power resided in blood rather than office, this chaos wasn't an ending, it was a test. As the empire weakened, families with land influence and local authority adapted. Some withdrew from public life, others aligned with emerging institutions. When the last Western Roman emperor was removed in 476 CE, Rome did not empty. It endured, stripped of empire, but not of memory. History records the fall of Rome as an ending, but stories passed down through the centuries tell a different story. They suggest that what mattered most, blood, memory, and authority, never depended on an emperor's throne. When the empire collapsed, those who believed in inheritance rather than conquest, they did not disappear. They waited, and in the centuries that followed, the names would change, and the symbols would sharpen, and the families that believed to have survived the fall of Rome would reemerge, not as emperors, but as something more enduring. When Rome fell, history recorded the end of an empire. But history rarely records what survives quietly. As legions dissolved and emperors vanished, some families did not flee, they didn't rebel, they endured. To those who truly believe that Rome never actually fell, the future of power did not belong to invaders or kings. It belonged to those who already knew how to rule without a throne. Among them, one name appears again and again in the final centuries of the empire: the Anicii. They were not conquerors, they were administrators, patrons and stewards of continuity. Now, according to later traditions, when Rome finally fractured, it was families like these who carried its inheritance forward, quietly, deliberately, but intact. The Anicii emerge in Roman history during the late Republic, but rise to prominence under the Empire. They were a senatorial dynasty not bound to a single emperor, but embedded within Rome's governing class itself. Now, unlike the imperial families that burned brightly and disappeared, the Anicii acquired their power slowly. They held consulships, governorships, control over vast estates, stretching from Italy all the way to the eastern provinces. By the 4th century, they were among the wealthiest families in the empire. To later believers, this matters deeply, because the Anicii did not rely on conquest, they relied on permanence. Like many noble Roman houses, the Anicii didn't trace their origins only through documents. They also traced it through myth. Roman traditions linked elite families to heroic founders, Trojan survivors, companions of Aeneas, and early Italic kings. While no single myth defines the Anicii family, later genealogists would describe them as the inheritors of Rome's oldest civic virtues: order, piety, and authority. To believe in ancient power is to believe that legitimacy precedes empire. In this telling, the Anicii were not merely Roman, they were pre-imperial in spirit. As Christianity spread through the empire, a lot of the Roman elites resisted it. The Anicii did not. They embraced the new faith early, not as revolutionaries, but as patrons. Churches were built on Anicii lands, bishops were drawn from the Anicii households. To those who study this transition, this is where the story starts to turn. Because when the empire weakened, Christianity did not oppose Rome, it inherited it. Families like the Anicii positioned themselves not against the future, but inside of it. Now, among the Anicii, one figure stands out as a symbol of faith and enduring influence: Saint Anicii Juliana. Born in the late 5th century into one of Rome's wealthiest senatorial families, she was renowned for her piety, charity, and patronage of the early Christian church. She funded the construction of many churches, supported Christian scholars, and preserved sacred texts at a time when Rome's cultural memory was at risk. Her devotion and lasting impact on the Christian community earned her recognition as a saint, not for miracles alone, but for a life spent safeguarding faith and culture during a period of upheaval. By the 5th century, Rome no longer ruled its borders, but family like the Anicii still ruled land, had wealth, and influence. When the empire collapsed, the Anicii did not just vanish from history. They appear in records as patrons of the church, protectors of Rome, and intermediaries between the old and new orders. In later tradition, this moment is not seen as a loss, but as a transfer. The empire fell, but the inheritance, it still remained. Now, in the centuries that follow, the name Anicii does fade from prominence, but the land remains, and according to late medieval tradition, these estates, titles, and alliances passed into new families, ones who would emerge in Rome during the Middle Ages. Now, one of those families, according to this line of belief, would become known as the Orsini. Not conquerors of Rome, but heirs to something far older. Empires announce their rise. They announce their fall. Families, they do neither. They persist through memory, through adaptation, through silence. To those who believe Rome never fell, the Anicii did not disappear. They became something else. And in the centuries ahead, as Rome rebuilt itself under new symbols, the families that said to have survived the fall of the empire would return to history bearing new names, carrying that old inheritance. Alright, thanks for watching. We hope you enjoyed that. And that's only the first installment of the Orsini family's history. There are 2 more installments to come, so come on back and check those out. Don't forget to hit that like, share, subscribe, leave us a comment. Tell me what you'd like to see. And don't forget to visit the link in the bio.